Hello and welcome to DSL 720, Budgets, Finance, and Resource Allocation in Organizations. We'll be talking today about things having to do around finances. So I wore my green and black checkered shirt because it's got green in the color of money. And if I haven't said it before, I'm sorry, but sorry I'm not there to be a part of the residential. I've got this pesky thing called customers who like me to be on site. And the days that I'm on site are the days you're in residential, so I wasn't able to make it. So I hope that this helps, and I hope that you're having a really great experience as this program kicks off. When I got introduced to curriculums and the ideas, it's very exciting about the direction this program is going to go in. So you probably just got done listening to my bio about the finance part of it and how my background has kind of led me to a place of dealing with a lot of financial type issues. I'm going to take a little different route today, and I'm going to push on some topics that might seem odd in a finance discussion, but I think it's important because when you're the leader of a finance organization, you're just not in charge of doing the beans and paying taxes and doing reports for people and cutting the check occasionally, but there's a lot more to it than that, and that's what I want to brush up against today. And I'm going to do it from a familiar topic that we've talked about before, and that has to do with the generation. So it's going to be a little bit of a review in some ways, but I want to get a running start at this thing, so I'm going to explain the finances. Finance leaders need to look into the future and determine who's going to be leading finance and how to prepare for their arrival. As the generations move up the ladder into higher and higher levels of leadership, they're bringing with them expectations, perspectives that are different than the previous generations, and that all has to be accounted for as a leader, as the senior most leader of an organization in terms of the finances. Some might say that's HR's job, and they'd mostly be correct. HR should be always thinking about that. Some people who do finance also do HR. They have to do both functions. So this might be a convenient way of merging those two things together. At the end of the day, though, it's up to you who lead your IT lane or your finance lane to be aware of issues with leadership, and that's what I want to talk about now. There are 5 generations, we've talked about this before, in the marketplace currently. Why is that happening? It has a lot to do with the silents aren't moving on as quickly as everybody thought they would. The silents are a generation that has a lot of horsepower in older leadership philosophies and mindsets, but as things move forward and become much more progressive and new, they're not always up to date on some of that stuff. So those 5 generations are being stalled because the silents aren't moving on as quick as everybody thought they were. The ones that have, then there's a healthy upflow of the generations into those chairs. But until that happens, there's going to be a certain amount of accountability for all 5 generations. No one's going to look at your lane like you are, so it's really up to you to figure this thing out and figure out how best to translate it into a financial perspective. The 5 generations are working in ministries and nonprofits primarily because they don't fit in the for-profit world any longer because they just don't go fast enough. A lot of times you'll see a silent in a role as a president or founder or CEO, and they created the company, so they're still there. But in nonprofits and ministry, that fits. In a for-profit world, it doesn't because they slow things down. Nonprofits and ministries settle for enough IT, cheap solutions, non-standard tech, due to budget issues. And that's been my world since 2007, to be honest with you. I've been in ministry or I've been in nonprofit, and both of those worlds are always trying to skimp by with as bare minimum amount of IT as possible. And it works sometimes it doesn't work, and when it doesn't work, they have to bring somebody in and pay them lots of money to straighten it all back out again. Last consideration instead of the first. When nonprofits and ministries are looking at their budgets, they're thinking about how to care for people, how to care for the people that care for people, how to pay their bills, all that stuff. Oh, and then there's this topic of IT. Is it working? Yeah, let's leave it till next year, and they head on without doing anything with it, and I think that's where it becomes a bit of an issue. We'll push back and they'll try to do it cheap. So they'll push back on you if you try to upgrade them and say, hey, let's take and replace the 5 different types of switches you have with something new, or let's take a new marketing approach this way. And you'll say, no, we've always done the yellow book pages, and those were $199 every year, and they're doing just fine. It's like, when's the last time you picked up a phone book and looked up an address or a phone number? We've got Hey Siri, and she takes care of all that stuff for us. The 5 generations are silents, who have an enormous amount of practical knowledge from before computers did everything. So They know how to do things, do research, fill out paperwork, how to think without a computer supplying them information. Plus, they've also got a database of life experience that has a lot of benefit in the running of an organization. Boomers have grown up through the ranks as IT evolved and it became more and bigger and better. So they've learned different types of using IT. They're not quite as reliant on it as some of the newer generations, and they know other ways to do things. They also became a part of the leadership when the government became more involved in regulation of things, with the Enron and different scandals that happened in the 80s and 90s. The boomers grew up through that phase, so they've watched regulations and guidelines and rules incrementally get higher, more intense, more intrusive in the business setting. So they knew how it used to be when there was a lot more freedom. Now they know how it is, and they bring all that knowledge to the table. Gen Xers only know finance through scandals and government regulation. That was their world, and they've watched it happen. So they're a little more cynical about leadership and how people run an organization than maybe the other generations. The boomers have a certain amount of caution about it. The silents were deeply embroiled in it, trying to straighten it all out again. When we talk about millennials, they're very good with technology and the theory of finance. They understand the theories of things. They haven't had time yet to take the theories and smash them into reality and see what comes out at when the two things combine. That part they're working on, and they're getting very, very good at it. They're very, very intelligent, very well prepared with the theory, but not necessarily the practicality. Practicality is really important. Just getting into the strategy of finance. The upper levels have to deal with finances at the 10,000 foot level, running an organization through recessions and through inflation and through multiple ups and downs in the marketplace prepares you at a strategic level that millennials are just starting to get exposed to, and they're bringing a holistic, different perspective to the whole world of finances that the other ones don't. And then finally, the Gen Z. Gen Zs are filling basic roles, so assistant accountants. They're on a path maybe becoming a CPA someday. The CPAs exist in the higher or in the older generations a lot more. The Gen Z just hasn't gotten there yet, but they're on their way, and they bring a whole different perspective when it comes to technology because they've only ever had technology. So they are absolutely fearless and very confident in their usages of it. That's why bringing them in at the bottom of the tree, if you will, in the administrative levels and the lower levels, and letting them rise up to through the whole tree up to the top where the leadership positions are, it influences the whole organization. So Gen Z holds great promise to introduce a lot of things we haven't considered before. So those are the 5 generations. Why is that important when we're talking budget and financing? Because each one of them has a different perspective and mindset. When you're talking to a silent, they're looking at retirement. They're on a glide path, and they want it to be a nice, gentle glide path, not a 90-degree turn and crash. They want it to be a gentle glide path into retirement. And that's their mindset. It's a very conservative mindset. It's a very practical. It's a very slow-moving and patient. The younger generations move a lot faster than that, and that freshness, the tension between the two levels just adds a whole level of creativity that we haven't seen before. The next generation of finance leadership, the silents and boomers are rotating out of their executive roles. They're starting to look like I have. I started my own business. I moved out of the corporate setting, and I now run a business. I teach, I write, I do all kinds of different income streams. And that's some of the executives at that high level have rotated out, and that means there's now room for the younger generations to move up. Xers will get some of the roles, and they're very capable, very good at what they do, but the marketplace has shown that it's leapfrogging over the Xers, and they're being passed up for some of these higher level positions. And they want to move with millennials who will come in at a cheaper price, but they also come in with the latest business training, the latest theory, and also the ability of millennials to bring different things together and create new solutions. It's really a powerful generation from that standpoint. And then millennials are young, and they're not anchored to the old systems and legacy. The excuse is, hey, we've always done it that way. It works. Why do we have to change it? Doesn't work for them. They are very creative. They're always pushing and challenging systems and processes to come up with a different way to do things. and the old ways of doing it doesn't appeal to them any longer. There's some history in that they can learn from, but at a certain point they don't see any value in it. Millennials are very collaborative. I have 3 millennial daughters, and they all throughout grade school, high school, and beyond, they've always been a part of a collaborative environment, a team. They've always been a part of a small group, and that small group is good for relationships, good for support, and also good for decision making, because none of us is as smart as all of us. So if you get a group of people together, you're going to come up with some really great and creative solutions. And millennials just lead that way. Boomers are creative. Don't sell them short, but they're not creative in the same ways because they haven't been as confident and been saturated with technology as the millennials have been. Boomers think, don't fix what isn't broken. And that philosophy's got to be pushed aside, and new philosophies and techniques need to be brought into place. Millennials and Gen Z have a different orientation to feedback and expectations of leadership. Let me say that one more time. Millennials and Gen Z have a different orientation to feedback and expectations of leadership. That's where we're going to go with this particular lesson, is just talk our way through that. So once again, picture a timeline. We've got silence at one side, Gen Z at the other, millennials, Xers, and boomers in between. And you've got this natural flow, whereas generations leave the executive level, the top of the pyramid, people come in behind them and fill those seats. And when they fill those seats, they fill them with a different mindset. It's happening very slowly because of economics and the false summits of retirement. A lot of boomers and silence had planned to retire when they turned 70, or planned to scale back considerably and just do a little something on the side. Now they're finding out, because of the cost of our healthcare, that has changed everything. Healthcare is very expensive, and because of that, boomers and silence are having to stay longer and to be able to afford to pay for their medications. Healthcare is unstable and expensive, and so is the economy. Right now, as anybody's guess, is inflation going up or down? Is recession about to hit? What's going to happen? All that uncertainty says to silence and Xers, or boomers who are in their chairs, let's hunker down. Let's not make any big decisions. Let's just stay here, stay put for a little while longer. Silence and boomers still have a lot to give. We still know a lot of stuff, and to sell us short in that, I think, is a mistake. Like I said earlier in another presentation, there's nothing new under the sun. It says that in the book of Ecclesiastes. Nothing new under the sun. So they might put a new coat of paint on it, change the name, speed it up by 5 or 10 megahertz and call it something new. But at the end of the day, it's the same old stuff. It's just done a little bit different way. Millennials and Z have the potential to bring in a whole new thought processes and mindsets that haven't existed before, and it's a very exciting time in leadership. But right now it's very unstable, and because of that unstability, silence and boomers are hunkering down as best they can. Millennials and Gen Z appreciate and seek out mentoring and coaching from humble and kind experts. Go to a soccer field on a Saturday, and you'll see several soccer games going on, from little itty bitties all the way up to high school kids. When you look at the little itty bitties, what you end up seeing is a whole herd of kids clustered around the ball, which generally is in the center, and they're all fighting to get at it and kicking it and back and forth and all that kind of stuff. And orbiting around this little herd of itty bitties is the coaches. The 2 coaches are saying real-time feedback the whole time. And they're saying, Johnny, kick the ball to the left. Sue, fill that spot and stand by the kid in the blue. And they're giving real-time feedback, and the kids grow up in that kind of environment, saturated by real-time feedback. If you look in a corporate setting, when does feedback occur? When you screw up, and once a year during your annual review. That's about the extent of the feedback you get in a typical corporate environment. For millennials and Gen Z, it's not good enough. And because it's not good enough, they're constantly seeking out wise experts who are kind and humble. They don't get up there and shout at them and tell them all kinds of stuff. They just say, let me walk alongside you and help you through this next season of your professional career. They're looking for that because that's how they grew up, with having these coaches continually giving feedback. Don't wait that without understanding. At the end of the day, that changes everything when it comes to how a leader interacts with their followers. And that's what I want to talk about in this particular segment. So let's look at the future of who's leading finance and how to prepare for their arrival. In 2015, I completed a dissertation on the orientation of feedback of 5 generations. Really, it was about 4.5 generations, when I did it because the Gen Z hadn't moved in quite as much as the other ones yet, so they were getting there. Um, I say zero point 0.5 because Gen Z was growing up and just starting to move into positions. My research found that each generation responds to feedback differently and has different expectations for frequency, style, and the purpose of the feedback. Each generation looks at feedback differently. That was the crux of my research project, and it came out now 7 years later. I'm getting to watch what happened, and a lot of what was predicted in some of the research has come true. Silence feedback. If you go to a silent and try to give them feedback, it's not expected. They didn't even seek it out. Quite honestly, they just put their heads down and do their jobs and tell you when you've done something wrong. How people receive is feedback is how they give it. So not given generally, it's unless forced. Not coaching but correcting. A silent will give you feedback, but it's not in a coaching kind of manner. It's in a, you did this wrong, don't ever do it that way again, do it this way, now go do your job. And that's the extent of a coaching session that I've had with silence before. I try not to do that myself. Boomers, feedback is welcome to a boomer, but it's also not as expected because silence didn't talk to them. Silence were their supervisors. They didn't talk to them, so they grew up in a world not having it, but they appreciate it. If you're willing to give a boomer feedback, you'll see them adapt their behavior immediately because they're very open to it. Gen Xers, they were very self-sufficient. Picture latchkey kids, came home from school every day, double working parents. They weren't there for them. So Gen Xers are very self-sufficient. They don't seek feedback. They're happy to be left alone, but they'll take it if offered as long as it's in a coaching format and not in a directorial command and control kind of stand where I'm coming to correct you and fix you. That's not what they're looking for. Millennials, constant, fresh, consistent feedback, check-ins desired and expected. Annual review is not enough. Quarterly is not enough. Monthly, they'll suffer with it. But they want feedback continuously throughout the day. They want somebody coming by and say, hey, great job, you're doing great. Clap them on the shoulder, say you're doing great work, keep up the good work. They want to know because they don't want to make any mistakes. It's a really great reason for wanting to have all the feedback. They just don't want to be too far down the path and figure out they've gone wrong and have to back up. So they'd rather have feedback from their boss saying, oh, wait a minute, before you do that, come back here. Let me tell you something. They come back, they do it, and then they start off again. So it's constant, fresh feedback. Gen Z, much like millennials, but with a more cynical twist to them a little bit when it comes to leadership, just because of what they've witnessed in our marketplace. Still too early to tell what their exact needs will be, but that should come to fruition here in the next couple of years. How they want it is how they give it. If the silent didn't give it, that's what they expect for you. They don't want you to give anything. How to do your job, and I'll tell you if I'm failing, is a lot of what feedback appears to be, and it just doesn't work that way. As millennials move into leadership roles, they will seek to change the feedback mechanism and may need to change laws and marketplace rules of thumb to make it happen. So it's going to be interesting as millennials move into those higher up echelons of leadership that they're going to be forcing their philosophies and mindsets down through the organization and expecting change to happen. They expected change to happen as they moved into the marketplace now, but they realize that if you're not in a leadership position, you can't change philosophies and mindsets. When you're leading a finance area, you get to dictate the environment that the work happens in, the context of that. And millennials will bring a different flavor to that. So we want to talk about a particular way to lead millennials. Robert Greenleaf, back in 1970, created a pamphlet called The Servant as Leader. The primary leadership style in the 70s was command and control coming out of the military because they were returning soldiers. They were used to go, and they would go. No questions asked about it, no collaboration, no committee meetings or anything. They did what they were told to do because that's what they were trained. Hippies, for lack of a better term, were challenging that in the 60s and 70s and saying we want a style that's more conducive to collaborative leadership, where we get to have we get to speak to our own environment. So they kind of challenged that. They saw the Greenleaf pamphlet, Robert Greenleaf's pamphlet, and just fell in love with it because it said at the end of the day, the leader, although at the top of the pyramid, is not focused on making the rest of the organization fit into the way they do things. They're more interested in fitting into the way their people do things, adapting to their motivational technique or style, or they're looking at how feedback or communication happens. Greenleaf's pamphlet about the servant leader was really much focused on that, and it ran counter to the command and control style. So now, all these years later, after the 70s, we start to see the servant leadership has taken and gained some traction in the marketplace. It provided a new way of pyramid of power was fit upside down. Now the leader was supporting the people above him, not the other way around. So if your primary communication style as a leader is the written word, then you would prefer to do it in the written word, and all your followers would have to follow suit. And what the servant leader does is it says, what's your particular style of communication? Well, I prefer verbal only. I don't want to have anything to read. The leader would adapt to that, and then this person would want to be able to walk and talk. And so there's a kinesthetic aspect to their desire for interaction with their supervisor. All that stuff is the servant leader adapting to the individual. Servant leadership is the only style that I endorse, quite honestly. I've looked at them all, situational, command and control, laissez-faire, all the different styles, and at the end of the day, I always come back to the servant leadership style. Now, a lot of people think it's a Christian thing. It's not. It was written by a secular gentleman. It's just that it happens to mirror a lot of how Jesus led his followers. Very much like the servant leadership style. Let's look at how it fits into the finance world. What I would do with servant leadership is I would adapt it and then use it to care for all the people under me or walking alongside me in the finance area. The servant leader shares power, puts the needs of others first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. You can see it's continually focused on the other person, not on yourself, but on the other person. The care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. At the end of the day, it's all about me serving you as your leader. It's very different than it used to be when the whole organization was meant to serve this individual and listen to their every word and implement it. Now it's much more, hey, how can I care for you? How can I provide an environment where you strive? There are 10 attributes to a servant leader. Those 10 attributes are listening, listening, which is part of reflective listening style, empathy, hearing, awareness, and persuasion. Those are the first 5. The second 5 are conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to growth of people, and building community. Those 10 attributes right there lay out for you a framework in which to lead people. When you're talking about listening, it's active listening. It's not listening to answer, but listening to learn and grow. Empathy, let's walk in the moccasins of our followers and see what they're struggling with. Maybe they're dealing with issues I'm not even aware of, and if I was aware of them, I could adapt their world to better serve them. Healing. A lot of people have had a lot of hits in marketplace settings or in their roles, and it's been tough. And walking a person through that in a healing kind of way is important. That's one of the attributes of a servant leader that I appreciate the most. Awareness. Are you, as a leader, aware what happens in a room when you show up? Or are you just completely oblivious to it and don't really care? Persuasion, it's about influencing. Neither group responds to experts well. So neither group, being the millennials and the Zs, they don't respond to experts as well as they do somebody with a coaching style that's saying, hey, let me walk alongside you, let me influence you in this direction. You can see behavioral change happen. Conceptualization is a big word, but basically it boils down to people want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. So if you can cast a big dream, a big vision for them, and help them understand how they're contributing in their role within that dream, people lock in and they become much more engaged. Foresight, nobody likes mistakes. Millennials and Gen Z appreciate a leader who looks ahead and guides them through issues and pitfalls. So nobody wants to make mistakes, particularly not millennials and Gen Z. So as a leader, how can I look ahead and make sure they're not going to stumble on something? Let me get to them, let me communicate, even if that means texting at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. If that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do to make sure that mistakes don't happen. Stewardship, they've been helicopter parented by their parents there, who were always there for them and always fought every battle. That's kind of what they're looking for. So as a leader, if you're there hovering around them and making sure they're doing well, they actually see that as caring for them, not necessarily micromanagement like we've experienced, but that I'm caring for you. I want to make sure you're protected. Commitment to growth in people. The leader has a real desire to help his people grow or her people grow. and become the very best versions of themselves. That's a commitment at the leadership level, looking at each person individually. I'm not going to create a generic process that fits everybody. I'm going to create a specialized process for each one of my followers. And lastly, building community. Both core cohorts grew up in teams, in community. They expect that to be the way. It's a very collaborative get together. Let's play ping pong during lunch. Let's do all this stuff as a team. They expect the leader to be the one that's leading in that, not just them. So the exercise for this is to put that servant leadership into and activate it with a couple of different generations. So what you're looking to do is I've given you a couple of worksheets. What you'll do is you look at the 10 attributes of the servant leader and you prioritize them. I've given you a little case study scenario. You can read that, and then the exercise is to determine how would you repair the situation that this leader finds themselves in using servant leadership and the 10 attributes. There's one for the millennials, and then there's one you can do for the boomers, but mostly it's just one of them. Say, I'm going to take the millennials and I'm going to put these priorities in line, and this is why I'm doing it. So the last part of the exercise is, once you prioritize the different attributes, is you go through and explain why you chose that priority and then why you believe it's going to help you. Hopefully that'll give you a chance to wrestle with this concept a little bit. But in a financial leadership role, it's important that we're leading our followers well, that we're creating an environment for the next generation as they follow us, so that we can leverage their skills and passions and motivation, and create a finance environment that serves the organization well. Hopefully that's going to be useful to you. If you have any questions about that, feel free to email me. Otherwise, have fun with the exercise. I think you're going to learn a lot from it. Be blessed. Thanks. Bye.